Arizona Territory, 1875. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in fiery hues of orange and gold, casting long shadows across the parched earth. In this unforgiving frontier where law was scarce and danger abundant, Kyle Young stood alone at the edge of his struggling cattle ranch, surveying the vast emptiness that mirrored the hollowness in his heart. At 25, his face still retained a youthful handsomeness despite the hardships etched into his features, a strong jawline covered with light stubble, eyes the color of the sky before a storm, and shoulders broad from years of labor. Kyle adjusted his worn Stetson hat, pushing it back slightly to wipe the sweat from his brow. 6 years of ranching solo had taught him one irrefutable truth: the frontier was no place for love, only survival. Everyone who'd ever meant something to him was gone, his parents to cholera, his older brother to an Apache raid 3 years prior. Attachments were dangerous liabilities in a land where death lurked behind every canyon and ridge. "Another day done," he muttered to himself, leading his chestnut mare toward the modest cabin he called home. The small ranch, nestled in a valley with access to precious water, was everything to him: his purpose, his legacy, and his prison. Sometimes in the dead of night, when coyotes held their lonely songs to the moon, Kyle would admit to himself that what he truly craved was not more cattle or land, but the sound of another voice answering his own. But such thoughts were dangerous indulgences. The Apache tribes to the north remained hostile despite recent peace talks. Cattle rustlers preyed on isolated ranches like his, and the nearest town was 2 days' ride away. No, Kyle had convinced himself that loneliness was the price of survival in the territory. Better to be alone than to watch someone else he loved die in this merciless land. 20 miles north, hidden among the red rock formations that served as natural fortresses, 19-year-old Hala Hashke crouched beside her father, Chief Natani of a small band of Chiricahua Apache. Her long black hair was braided tightly, and her dark eyes scanned the horizon with practiced precision. Unlike the other women in her tribe, she wore a mixture of traditional Apache garments and clothing taken from white settlers, a concession her father allowed due to her unique position. "Father, our people grow hungrier," she said in their native tongue. "The reservation promises are empty words, and the soldiers push us farther into barren lands." The aging chief nodded gravely. "Which is why you must continue your task. Your mother was white before she joined our people. You can move between both worlds as no other can." Hala touched the silver pendant at her neck, her mother's last gift before dying of the white man's disease 3 winters past. Her mother had taught her perfect English and the ways of white society before her death, preparing her for this role, to venture into white towns disguised as a settler, gathering information and occasionally trading for necessities the tribe desperately needed. "I will leave at dawn," she said, knowing her duty but feeling the familiar ache of isolation. Neither fully Apache nor white, Hala belonged nowhere completely. The young men of the tribe respected her skills but kept their distance, seeing her as different, dangerous. In white settlements, she played a role, never revealing her true self. What she craved, though she never spoke it aloud, was to find someone who would see all of her both worlds that lived inside her heart and not turn away. As the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon the next morning, Kyle woke to the distant sound of gunfire. He bolted upright, grabbing the Winchester rifle he kept beside his bed, and hurried outside. The shots had come from the direction of the stream that marked his northern boundary, the same direction as Apache territory. "Damn it," he muttered, quickly saddling his horse. If rustlers were attempting to steal his cattle using the cover of Apache tensions as a distraction, they'd chosen the wrong rancher to rob. He rode hard, following the shallow riverbed that provided precious water for his livestock. As he rounded a bend, he reined in sharply at the sight before him. A young woman in a simple blue dress lay crumpled beside the water, blood staining the fabric at her shoulder. Nearby, a horse with a simple saddle grazed nervously. Kyle's first instinct was caution: this could be a trap, but when the woman moaned softly, human decency overcame frontier suspicion. He dismounted, rifle ready, and approached. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. The woman's eyes fluttered open, deep brown eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Her black hair had come loose from its pins and framed a face of striking beauty despite the pain etched across it. "Help me," she whispered, her English perfect but tinged with an accent he couldn't place. 3 men tried to, my horse. Kyle quickly assessed the wound. A bullet had grazed her shoulder, painful but not life-threatening. Can you ride? My ranch is close, not safe out here. The woman nodded weakly. As he helped her to her feet, Kyle felt an unwelcome warmth spreading through his chest, something he hadn't felt in years, something dangerous. Hala struggled to maintain her disguise through waves of pain. The men who'd attacked her weren't simple thieves but scouts who'd recognized her from a previous town visit. She'd managed to escape, but not before taking a bullet. Now, ironically, she found herself dependent on the kindness of a white rancher, the very people her tribe increasingly distrusted. At the ranch, Kyle helped her inside his cabin and set about treating her wound with surprising gentleness for a man with such calloused hands. I'm Kyle Young, he said as he cleaned the graze with whiskey, making her wince. This is my ranch. Not much, but it's mine. Hannah, she replied, using her practiced white name. Hannah Harrison. I was traveling to Tucson to meet my uncle. The lie came easily after years of practice. Thank you for helping me. No decent man would leave a woman bleeding by a riverbank, Kyle said matter-of-factly, though his eyes betrayed a deeper concern. Those men who attacked you, they say anything about why? Hala tensed. I believe they wanted my horse and belongings, nothing more. Kyle nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. You're welcome to stay until you're strong enough to travel. Town's 2 days' ride and that shoulder needs rest. I couldn't impose, she began, but Kyle cut her off. Miss Harrison, look around, there's nothing but dust and cattle for miles. I'd be a poor excuse for a Christian if I sent an injured woman off alone. That night, Kyle gave Hala his bed while he slept on a bedroll by the hearth. As she lay awake, listening to his steady breathing, she contemplated her predicament. She needed to get word to her father about the scouts, but her injury made immediate travel impossible. And something about the lonely rancher with the kind eyes made her hesitate to flee at the first opportunity. Morning brought new challenges when Kyle discovered Hala attempting to change her bandage herself. Here, let me help, he offered, reaching for the clean cloth. I can manage, she insisted, but winced as she tried to reach the wound. Stubborn, aren't you? Kyle said with a hint of a smile, the first she'd seen from him. Reminds me of my mother. She could break a finger and still insist on making dinner for the whole family. As he gently tended her wound, Hala found herself studying his face, the creases around his eyes that spoke of squinting against harsh sunlight, the firmness of his jaw that suggested determination, and most surprisingly, the softness in his gaze when he focused on not causing her pain. Your family, she ventured cautiously, are they nearby? Kyle's hands paused momentarily. Gone, Pa and Ma to cholera, brother to an Apache raid few years back. Hala felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it, though complexity twisted inside her. Her people had suffered greatly at the hands of white settlers, too. That's the territory for you, Kyle said with practiced detachment. Takes more than it gives most days. Later that day, Kyle needed to check on his cattle. To his surprise, Hala insisted on accompanying him. You should rest that shoulder, he protested. I've been resting all morning, she countered. And I'd like to see your ranch, unless you'd prefer I stay among your personal things unsupervised. Her eyebrow arched slightly. Kyle chuckled despite himself. Well, when you put it that way. But we'll take it slow, and you'll ride Penny, she's gentle. As they rode side by side across the ranch land, Kyle found himself pointing out features he'd never bothered to name aloud before, the ridge where wildflowers bloomed after spring rains, the ancient oak that somehow survived in this harsh landscape, the spot where he planned to build a larger corral come winter. You speak of this land with love, Hala observed. Kyle considered this. Suppose I do. It's hard and unforgiving, but there's beauty here if you look for it. My mother used to say the same about life, Hala said, the truth slipping out before she could catch herself. Your mother sounds wise, Kyle replied, their eyes meeting briefly before both looked away. That night, as they ate a simple stew Kyle had prepared, a sudden thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Rain hammered the roof of the small cabin, and lightning illuminated the interior in brief, brilliant flashes. Been needing this rain, Kyle commented as he stoked the fire. Land's been thirsty. It's beautiful, Hala said, watching the lightning dance across the distant mountains. My people, she stopped abruptly, realizing her mistake. Kyle looked up sharply. Your people. Hala recovered quickly. My family, we lived near mountains like these when I was small, not entirely a lie. The silence that followed felt charged with unasked questions. Finally, Kyle spoke again. Never told me where you're from originally, Miss Harrison. Does it matter? She countered softly. Kyle studied her face in the firelight. Guess not. Out here, most folks are running from something or looking for something. Sometimes both. And you, Mr. Young, which are you doing? Kyle poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. Started out running. After my brother died, couldn't stand the sympathy looks in town. Now I reckon I'm just surviving. Is surviving enough? Hala asked, the question as much for herself as for him. Kyle looked up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. Used to think so. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Kyle tended his ranch while Hala recovered her strength, insisting on helping with small chores despite his protests. She proved surprisingly knowledgeable about horses and plants, identifying herbs near the stream that could be used for medicine or cooking. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a section of fence, Kyle found himself laughing at a story Hala told about a stubborn mule she'd encountered on her travels. The sound of his own laughter startled him. It had been so long since anything had genuinely amused him. You should do that more often, Hala said, pausing in her work. Do what? Laugh, it suits you better than scowling. Kyle felt a warmth creep up his neck that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. Don't get much practice at it out here alone. Perhaps that's why God sent me tumbling into your stream, Hala suggested with a small smile, to remind you. The casual reference to divine providence struck Kyle as oddly fitting, though he'd long ago stopped attending the church services held in town monthly. Something about this woman's presence was making him reconsider many things he'd accepted as immutable truths about his life. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular color, Kyle felt a sense of contentment he'd nearly forgotten was possible. Beside him, Hala had grown quiet, her expression pensive. Something troubling you? He asked. She hesitated. I should continue my journey soon. My shoulder is nearly healed thanks to your care. The words landed like stones in Kyle's stomach, though he'd known this moment would come. Of course, I can take you to town when you're ready. You've been very kind, she said, her eyes meeting his. Kinder than I expected. What does that mean? Hala looked away. Nothing. Just that a woman alone expects certain treatment, and you've been a gentleman. Kyle sensed there was more she wasn't saying, but didn't press. Instead, he found himself saying, no rush, you know. Town's not going anywhere, and an extra pair of hands around here has been nice. The smile she gave him in response made his heart perform a strange flutter in his chest. That night, Kyle lay awake on his bedroll, troubled by unfamiliar feelings. This woman, this Hannah Harrison, had somehow slipped past defenses he'd spent years building. The thought of her leaving left him hollow, yet he had no right to ask her to stay. What could he offer her but a hard life on a struggling ranch? And beyond that, there was something about her he couldn't quite place, small inconsistencies in her story, moments when she seemed to catch herself before speaking freely. Little did he know that across the small cabin, Hala too lay awake, torn between duty and desire. Her father would be worried by her extended absence. Her people needed the information she was meant to gather. Yet in this simple cabin with this solitary rancher, she'd experienced a kind of peace she'd never known before, a place where she wasn't defined solely by her usefulness or her divided heritage. The choice was made for them both the next morning when they spotted a dust cloud approaching from the north, riders, at least 5 of them, coming fast. Kyle grabbed his rifle. Get inside, he ordered, his voice tight. Who is it? Hala asked, though a sickening certainty was already forming in her gut. Can't tell yet, could be Apache, could be rustlers. Kyle's jaw was set in a hard line. Either way, stay out of sight. But Hala didn't move toward the cabin. Instead, she stared at the approaching riders with growing dread. Kyle, I need to tell you. Inside Hannah, now, the sharpness in his voice brooked no argument. Reluctantly, she retreated, but only as far as the window where she could see the yard. As the riders drew closer, she recognized the lead figure with a jolt of both relief and fear: Nitho, her father's most trusted warrior, flanked by 4 young braves. Outside, Kyle stood his ground as the Apache warriors reined to a halt several yards from the cabin. Their faces were painted for war, and each carried a rifle alongside traditional weapons. The leader spoke in heavily accented English. "White man, we search for woman. Apache woman who dresses as white, you see her." Kyle's blood ran cold, his mind racing to process this unexpected development. "No Apache here," he answered steadily. "Just me and my ranch." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "We track her here." "To this place you lie." Kyle raised his rifle slightly. "I said there's no Apache here. This is my land. You need to move on." Inside, Hala made her decision. She could not let blood be shed because of her deception. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out onto the porch. "Nitho," she called in Apache, "I am here. No harm has come to me." The shock on Kyle's face was like a physical blow. He turned to her, bewilderment and betrayal warring in his expression. "Hannah." "My name is Hala Hashke," she said quietly, "daughter of Chief Natani of the Chiricahua." The world seemed to tilt beneath Kyle's feet. The woman he'd rescued, cared for, and against all better judgment begun to care about was Apache, the very people who had killed his brother. Yet when he looked at her, he saw neither enemy nor deceiver, but simply Hala, the woman who'd brought laughter back into his life. "You've been lying to me," he said, his voice hollow. "Yes," she admitted, "and no, the attack was real, my journey was real, but my purpose was not what I claimed." Nitho interrupted impatiently in Apache. "Hala, your father worries. Come now, this white man can still raise alarm." "He saved my life, Nitho," she replied in the same language. "He is not our enemy." Kyle watched this exchange, understanding nothing but recognizing the tension. "What's happening?" Hala turned back to him. "They've come to take me home, Kyle. I must go with them." "Were you spying on me?" he demanded, the hurt evident in his voice. "Was everything just a way to gather information?" "No," her denial was vehement. "I was injured and lost. You showed me kindness when you had no reason to trust me." "What happened here was," she trailed off, unable to find words that would bridge the chasm suddenly between them. Kyle's face hardened. "Then go back to your people." The finality in his voice cut through Hala like a knife. She took a step toward him, but he turned away, rifle still clutched in his hands but pointed at the ground. "Kyle, please try to understand." "I understand plenty," he said without looking at her. "You're Apache, I'm a white settler. There's nothing more to understand." With a heart that felt like lead, Hala walked past him toward the waiting warriors. Nitho helped her mount behind him, and without another word, the group turned and rode north, leaving Kyle standing alone in the yard, exactly as he had been before her arrival, yet irrevocably changed. The days that followed were darker than any Kyle had known since his brother's death. He threw himself into ranch work with punishing intensity, exhausting his body in hopes of quieting his mind. But in every corner of the small cabin, in every task throughout the day, he found reminders of Hala's brief presence in his life. He told himself repeatedly that her deception proved his long-held belief. Attachments were dangerous, especially out here where cultural divisions ran as deep as canyons. She had been Apache all along, his natural enemy by the frontier's harsh logic. Yet each night as he lay alone, different memories surfaced: Hala's smile as she teased him about his cooking, the gentleness in her hands as she tended a newborn calf, the wisdom in her observations about the land. Nothing in those moments had felt like deception. A week after her departure, Kyle rode to town for supplies, hoping human contact might break the spell of isolation that now felt suffocating rather than safe. In the general store, he overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. "Army's planning a sweep through the northern canyons," a grizzled prospector was saying. "Word is they're tired of waiting for the Apache to accept reservation life. Going to force the issue." "About time," replied the storekeeper. "Can't have savages roaming free while decent folk try to build something here." Kyle's hands tightened around the sack of flour he was holding. "When?" he asked abruptly, drawing both men's attention. "When what?" the prospector asked. "When is this sweep happening?" The men exchanged glances. 2 days from now, I heard." "Why, you got some stake in this, young?" Kyle shook his head, just curious. He paid for his supplies and left quickly, his mind racing. The ethical dilemma kept him awake all night. Whatever Hala had concealed from him, did her people deserve to be caught unaware by an army detachment? The smaller bands like the one she belonged to had largely avoided the worst conflicts, from what he'd gathered. If soldiers surprised them in their camp, there would be bloodshed and Hala might be among the casualties. By morning, Kyle had made his decision. He packed provisions, saddled his fastest horse, and headed north toward the Red Rock formations where Apache bands were known to camp. It was madness, he knew. He might be shot on sight or worse, but the thought of not warning Hala was unbearable. He rode hard through the day, pushing deeper into territory he would normally avoid at all costs. As the sun began to set, he found himself in a narrow canyon, the walls rising steep on either side, a perfect place for an ambush. As if conjured by the thought, figures appeared on the ridges above, bows drawn and aimed at him. Kyle slowly raised his hands, showing he carried no weapon. "I seek Hala Hashke," he called out, hoping someone understood English. "Daughter of Chief Natani, I bring warning." For long moments, nothing happened. Then a familiar voice called down from above, "Kyle." Hala appeared at the edge of the ridge, her hair loose around her shoulders, dressed now in traditional Apache garments. Even at this distance, the shock was evident in her posture. "Why are you here?" she called. "Army's coming," he replied simply. 2 days, a sweep through these canyons." Murmurs spread among the Apache warriors at his words. Hala spoke rapidly to them in their language, then gestured for Kyle to continue forward. 2 braves materialized from behind rocks to escort him, their expressions wary but not overtly hostile. They led him to a small encampment tucked into a protected valley, where perhaps 30 Apache lived in traditional wickiups. As Kyle dismounted, he felt dozens of eyes upon him, the first white man many had seen up close who wasn't wearing a soldier's uniform. Hala approached, flanked by an older man whose bearing marked him as a chief. "My father, Chief Natani," she said formally. "Father, this is Kyle Young, the rancher who helped me when I was injured." The chief studied Kyle with penetrating eyes. "You risk much coming here, rancher." "Your daughter risked much to help her people," Kyle replied steadily. "I'm returning the favor." Something like approval flickered in the chief's expression. He nodded once, then turned to speak with his warriors, leaving Kyle and Hala alone. "You should not have come," she said softly. "Probably not," Kyle agreed, "but I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't warned you. Even though I deceived you." Kyle looked at her, really looked at her, seeing both the Hannah he had known and the Hala she truly was. "You told me once that your mother said life was hard but beautiful if you looked for it. I've been thinking about that. Maybe people are the same way." The ghost of a smile touched Hala's lips. "Perhaps they are." The camp burst into activity as the Apache prepared to move before the army arrived. Kyle found himself included in their council, describing what he knew of the military's likely approach. By midnight, a plan had formed. The band would move deeper into the mountains, to caves and hideaways known only to them. "You should return to your ranch," Chief Natani told Kyle as preparations concluded. "If soldiers find you here, they will assume the worst." Kyle nodded, knowing the chief was right, yet reluctant to leave. "Will your people be safe?" "We have survived for generations in these mountains," the chief said with dignity. "We will continue to do so." Hala walked with Kyle to where his horse was tethered. The night was cool, stars blazing overhead in a tapestry no town dweller ever truly saw. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your warning may save many lives." "I didn't do it for them," Kyle admitted. "I did it for you." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the barriers between them, cultural, historical, personal, seemed paper-thin. "Kyle, I never meant to." "I know," he interrupted gently. "You were protecting your people. I understand that now." Hala reached up, touching his face with fingers that seemed to burn against his skin. "In another world, perhaps." "Yeah," he said roughly, "in another world." He mounted his horse, looking down at her one last time. "Be safe, Hala Hashke. And you, Kyle Young." As he rode away, Kyle felt something inside him change, the hardness he'd cultivated since his brother's death beginning to crack and reshape itself into something new. The frontier hadn't changed. It was still dangerous, still unforgiving, but perhaps his understanding of how to live within it had. 2 weeks passed. Kyle threw himself into ranch work, expanding his cattle operation with a new determination. The army sweep had occurred as predicted, but according to town gossip, they'd found nothing but abandoned camps. The Apache had vanished like morning mist. Each day, Kyle found himself scanning the horizon, though for what he couldn't have said. The loneliness that had once been comfortable now felt like an ill-fitting coat, restrictive and chafing. Then one evening, as Kyle returned from checking his herd, he spotted a lone figure waiting beside his cabin, a woman in a simple blue dress, black hair braided down her back. He reined in his horse, heart hammering against his ribs. "Hala." She stepped forward into the fading light. "I was not sure you would welcome me." Kyle dismounted slowly as if sudden movements might make her disappear. "Your people, are they safe?" She nodded, "Yes. Thanks to your warning, we avoided the soldiers entirely." She hesitated. "My father has taken our band north to join relatives near the territorial border. They will be safer there with greater numbers." "But you're here," Kyle said, still trying to understand. "I am here," she confirmed softly, "if you will have me." "As what?" he asked, needing clarity despite the hope unfurling in his chest. Hala took another step toward him. "As someone who is neither fully white nor fully Apache, but simply herself. As someone who has walked in both worlds and found that people are indeed like life, hard but beautiful if you look for it." Her dark eyes held his. "As someone who believes that even on this harsh frontier, love is not just possible, but necessary." Kyle closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "People will talk. A white rancher and an Apache woman. Let them," she said with a lift of her chin. "We will show them another way is possible." "It won't be easy," he warned, though his heart had already decided. "The things worth having rarely are," she replied. In that moment, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Kyle realized the truth he'd been fighting for so long. The frontier's greatest danger wasn't attachment or vulnerability, but the isolation that slowly drained life of meaning. What he'd thought was strength had been a prison of his own making. "Stay," he said simply, "not just tonight, but for all the nights to come." Her answer was in her smile, radiant and certain, as she stepped into his embrace. 6 months later, Kyle and Hala stood before a traveling preacher in the town of Tucson, speaking vows that bound them together as husband and wife. The ceremony was small, a few ranchers Kyle had known for years, some curious townspeople, and remarkably, 2 Apache elders who had traveled to witness the union with the blessing of Hala's father. Not everyone approved. There were whispers and dark looks from some quarters, but there was also a grudging respect for the couple who had bridged a divide many thought uncrossable. As they rode back to their ranch that evening, the setting sun bathed the desert in the same fiery glow that had illuminated Kyle's solitude a year before. But now, with Hala beside him, the landscape seemed not empty but full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Kyle smiled, reaching across to take her hand. "I'm thinking that for a man who believed the frontier was no place for love, I've found an awful lot of it." "And for a woman caught between 2 worlds," Hala replied, squeezing his hand, "I have finally found my home." The ranch thrived under their joint care. Kyle's knowledge of cattle combined with Hala's understanding of the land created a prosperity neither could have achieved alone. In time, children came, first a son with his father's blue eyes and his mother's black hair, then a daughter whose spirit seemed as vast as the Arizona sky. They faced hardships, of course: drought years, cattle sickness, continuing tensions between settlers and native peoples. But they faced them together, their union a living testament to the truth they had discovered. That even in the harshest landscape, love could not only survive but flourish. And on quiet evenings, as they sat together watching the sun sink behind the mountains, they would sometimes speak of those first days of misconceptions and revelations, of wounds healed and bridges built. Their story became legend in the territory, whispered around campfires and retold in saloons, the tale of the lonely rancher and the disguised Apache woman, who found in each other not just love, but a new vision of what the frontier could become.